Hi, everybody. It's good to see you, and welcome to the April monthly Zoom of the 4th Division of the NMRA's Pacific Northwest region. Today, we're going to have a comprehensive briefing from Larry Sloan about his budding HO scale model railroad, and he's going to stop during the presentation several times for us to ask Q&A and you know, discuss, criticize, and commend his construction techniques. So with that, Larry, go ahead and introduce yourself and give us your presentation.
Hi, everybody. I feel like I know a bunch of you already, but my name's Larry Sloan, and I live in Kent, Washington. And I've been modeling trains for about 16 or 17 years, and did a little bit of model railroading when I was a kid. Unlike probably a lot of you guys, I started with HO. So. All right, welcome everybody to my South Olympic branch, HO scale model railroad. I'm going to start with a little bit of history. And so you could say it all started here. This is a view from my parents' front yard sometime in the early 70s when we had snow going on. This is in Elma, Washington. And this was or was the Northern Pacific before it became part of the Burlington Northern Railroad. Here's the depot that existed in Elma up until the mid 80s sometime when it was torn down. And this was, something that I remember seeing when I was a kid. This is not my photo. I got it off the internet. Somebody gave it to me as kind of oh, you're modeling this area. Here, have this for your personal use. Well, I can't remember the name of the person who took the photo, and sorry about that. If somebody does know that person, let them know this is my apologies, and I'll send them a note of thanks. This was taken by me in 2010, again, outside my parents' house. You can see a little bit of a difference there, and by this time it's the Puget Sound and Pacific. The Burlington Northern had basically left the area at that point and become the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, as many of you also know. When I was a kid, let me skip back a little bit. My brother Marty was given about a 4x10 model railroad by one of his customers on his paper route. And I think I played with that more than he did. Had the Tyco transformer and had a Tyco GP38 that quit running very well, very quickly. But I knew nothing about cleaning wheels or cleaning track or any of that stuff. So I kind of ended up giving up on the hobby for a while. And then about 2005, I started getting back interested in trains. I tried RC cars and didn't like the attitude of the people that I was hanging out with, and got into trains, and thereafter started in the this is a really poor shot of my early train setup on the kitchen table at our condo. But shortly thereafter, I got involved with the Tacoma Northwestern Model Railroad Club, and really learned a lot about model railroading. Good things to learn from Herb Buell specifically, but I got to know a lot of great guys in the hobby. Let's see. So I started thinking about building something, and I waffled back and forth on this for a long time. And I looked at all 3 bedrooms in our condo, and my wife, as gracious as she is, even offered to let me build something in the master bedroom. I ultimately decided that our king size bed would not fit in any of the other rooms. And so it was a much better conclusion to build it in a different room. So this was built in a 8.5 by 9.5 foot bedroom with a closet on which you'd see on the left end there. I took the door off, and there was a lift bridge where the doorway was in the lower left there. And I did my best with the space I had available, although it was fun. It really didn't, do many of the things that I wanted to do, but it was a great building experience, in part because you read a lot about a lot of different building techniques, one of which was using foam, insulation board for your base. And I did that with this railroad and then decided I'm never doing it again. I didn't like mounting tortoises through it. I actually found it did move, and started causing a derailment after a cold snap in 2016. Here's a picture of my river crossing on that layout. This bridge was a Walther's kit that I built and weathered, and I called this the Cheat Helix River, as my layout is based on Grays Harbor County, and I didn't have enough room to actually model a really realistic looking Chehalis River. So I just modeled this really short section and called it the Chehalis River. There's another shot of the bridge, and just one of my freight trains going across it. I weathered that Jeep 20 Walther's Proto 2000 unit right there. Another shot. This shows a little bit of the Olympic Foods facility up in the corner there. Even though this railroad was so small, it did have a grade on it. The Olympic Foods facility was about 2 inches above the rest of it. There's another shot from this was Matheson Mechanical. I had a lot of background buildings on this, and down in front, you'll see what looks like there's a hole there, and there was a hole in the wall. I told my wife that I was going to cut a hole in the closet wall, and she heard me at the time. And then later on, she says to me, "How do the trains get in the closet?" And I said, "Oh, I cut a hole in the wall." And she looks at me and she goes, You cut a hole in the wall?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And I said, "I told you I was going to do that." And she looks at me and she goes, "Eh." And she turns around and walks away. I know that some of you got to be laughing at that, but I can only see a couple. Anyway, this is what it looked like inside the closet as I started progressing. And this is about as far as the yard / staging got. The reason why there's a seam in the background in the middle there, or not really in the middle right, is because that closet had a angle in it. And I actually built and cut that building to fit in the angle, along with the photographic backdrops that I made. Feel free to unmute yourselves at this point and ask any questions you have about the original railroad.
The question I had was, did I see a working signal on that upper level of that layout?
Yes, I had one working signal on there, and I have a block watcher, which is a current detector that I had on that, so that when a train was occupying the line, it would turn red. Okay.
When you say you didn't like the foam board, it moved.
I think it was a combination of humidity and temperature, because it worked well for a while, and then we had this cold snap in 2016. And we had this cold snap. It was also very dry. I had these two sheets that went together, and they were glued down, but the adhesive didn't stop the two sheets from shifting against each other. The other thing I learned was, when you're trying to install tortoises and you're doing that with that extra, inch or 2 inches of throw length, it becomes a royal pain to do that. And so the benefit I found of working with the foam is that I could go back later and I could carve it, make a ditch or a pool or something like that. That part of it worked really well. I decided that the benefits of working with it weren't enough to compensate for the issues that I had with it. Bear in mind that even if you don't feel like you've got the space for a railroad, man, building even a small one is really beneficial to your future self. Let's move on then. So in 2016, we decided to sell the condo. we did so. We bought a house, and the house was kind of small. It's 984 square feet, 3 bedroom, 1 bath. I feel like the garage is about half the size of the house, and it was just it was not included in the square footage, but it's a pretty good sized garage. We had kind of a big backyard though. We had quite a bit of room back there, and you'll see in a minute. So this is what our backyard looked like when we bought the house. And I started immediately planning for an addition after we bought the house. And this is July 4th, 2020, when I was laying out the stakes for the foundation. I was my own general contractor, so I was doing all this stuff myself. And you talk about nerve-wracking, because man, if I screwed that up, oof. So this is like about a week later, where the contractor had come through. And this guy was an artist with a track hoe. That was really a fantastic job. I was very impressed. Another contractor came through and put in the forms and poured the foundation for it. This is an all-train room. The part on the right is an addition to the master bedroom and another bathroom there too. This is probably a couple weeks after that. The framers started, putting up the outside walls. I initially thought I might do some of this myself, but there was nobody to help me handle those. More of the framing. Now we got part of the roof on. And then I took a picture with my drone of the roof from above. And then I put all the siding on the addition myself. This is cement fiberboard, not that you need to know that, I guess. And then I painted. Now I haven't painted the whole house because I ran out of time to get it done when it was warm enough. But some of you might think that color looks a little familiar. This is the inside of the train room as the guys were putting up, or were almost done putting up the drywall. And then I painted the walls on the interior of the addition. The part back there in the far left is where my helix is, and that's at the level of the garage floor. So 7 foot by 7 foot of my train room actually extends into the oversized 2-car garage. And then later I'm putting down laminate flooring. And as you can tell here, I'm getting a little excited about actually doing some train building instead of building in 1-to-1 scale. So now we're going to talk about South Olympic Branch version 2, still an HO scale. I've always modeled an HO scale. I've never had any other scales. Its era is 1970 to 1995. It's freelanced. Locale is Grays Harbor County in Western Washington, and it's currently I'm at point to point with continuous run planned, and my minimum radius at the moment is 31 inches. Maximum grade is 2.2%, and that is in the helix. The height will vary from 25 to 54 inches, with a planned staging deck at 72 inches, just about. The track is generally code 83. I use Digitrax DCC with wireless and Wi-Fi. My room is basically 14 by 23 plus the 7 foot by 7 foot helix area. And I started construction on the layout at the very end of 2020. So here's a track plan as pretty much the track is on the main, what I consider the main level. This is the 54-inch high part of the railroad. At the top right, you see where the track enters from the helix, and then goes into the yard, what I will call Elma. And then over to the left is the turntable and the engine and servicing facility, and there'll also be a RIP track over there. I plan on putting a little switch engine pocket in that corner of the layout. Then there's the peninsula. And the peninsula is about 16 feet long. Okay, so here's a shot of the beginning of the construction of the benchwork. For the wall part of it, I wanted to experiment. I used shelf brackets for this part of it. That worked out pretty well with what I did. You can kind of see there's plywood on top of those shelf brackets so that I could put holes in it and just have the wiring run right through some of the holes through there. And then the idea with the shelf brackets was for me to initially be able to play with the height a little bit and see how I felt about the deck separation that I had. The rest of the layout is not built this way because I had settled on what I wanted to do with the height. And here's the helix. This is with one track in there. I've now put a second track. It is basically there for, for getting from the lower level to the main level. And right now it doesn't go much further than just getting to the lower level, but you'll see a picture of that. And for my in-between deck lighting, I'm using some LED lights that can be controlled by HomeKit, or whatever the Android version of that is, so that I can change the color, go from morning to evening if I wanted to do that. These happen to be a Philips product. There's also, they do a really good job of lighting the lower deck. I'm really pleased with it. This is building the peninsula. So I kind of built this false wall and I screwed it to the floor, and I built these, these wide pieces to help stabilize the wall as well. This is right after I had almost finished building all the turnouts for the yard. There's a couple more that aren't quite installed in there yet, but this is the, I guess you'd call it the west, quote unquote, end of Illinois Yard here. And then I started building the crossing for the Wynoochee River. Now you'll notice if you're kind of paying attention earlier, you'll notice that earlier I said Chehalis River, and this time I said Wynoochee. And I discovered as I was building this that the BN didn't actually cross the Chehalis River. The Union Pacific and the Milwaukee did, but the BN didn't actually do that. But the BN did cross the Wynoochee River just south of Montesano. And so I started messing around with the idea of having a Wynoochee bridge. Really, this doesn't matter because all the bridges in Grace Harbor County are all single track bridges. And my bridges are going to end up being double track just because I want double track. As I've said, when it comes to model railroading, I basically do what I want. So the prototype idea is great, but I tend to just take it and do what I want with it. One neat side note, the piers for this bridge are 3D printed by my friend Chip Van Gilder, who some of you probably know. He designed and printed those piers for me after he heard I was looking for something a little bit different, and he asked me about it. He loves projects like that, so he just went ahead and did it. A little bit more progress on the river scene. You can see, once again, photographic backdrop here. This was actually taken with an iPhone 12 Pro Max panorama mode. And then I just used Photoshop elements to cut it into a rectangle. And it was printed on 3mm PVC by Mike Sleece, who's the chair of the 4th Division HO Modular Group. He owns Speedy Printing in Tacoma. Shameless plug, I guess, but he prints backdrops for people. Of course, you have to pay for it, but I think it looks fantastic. I like the way it turned out, I should say. A little bit more progress on the river. And then we'll kind of switch over to some signaling there. I'm controlling my signals with mostly with LCC, but some of it is going to be based on turnout position as well, especially for some dwarf signals that I've got in the yard. Okay. Now at that point, I still wasn't actually done with this river scene, but what I had done there was I tinted a product called Magic Water, and it was the stuff that I used for the water product on the river. Tyler Whitcomb told me about that. And I think it's really works out really good. Okay, there we go. So another scene, you get another shot of the scene. You can see a little bit more of the river. You can see how it transitions over into the Olympic Foods complex that is now being built on the new railroad. I rescued some of the buildings from the original railroad. This was one of them. And I had lighting and such in there. You can see it's just a little bit bright right now. I've gone back and added some resistors and stuff to cut down on the lighting in it so it doesn't look like a bomb went off in the office. The same area, we also have Martin and Sons Custom Fabricators that builds machinery and tooling for various other businesses. Scenery. I like doing scenery. I haven't got to the point where I get to do what I feel like is enough of that yet. Some of this stuff is Woodland Scenics. Some of it comes from a company called Scenery Express, especially these bushes and stuff. I really like their scenery products. I think they look fantastic. And okay, industries on the main level. So Pacific Ready Mix is they never had delivery by rail in Grays Harbor County, but I wanted some cement trains, so I put this on the layout. There's going to be a representation of what they called Ventron, which was a chemical plant that produced like chemicals for paper products, and that was just outside of, or still is actually just south of Elma, Washington. If you guys get a chance and it's something you're interested in, check it out on like Google Earth. And there are something like 17 buildings there and miles of piping. And I don't have enough room to model this whole thing either, but it is going to take up most of one side of the peninsula. I don't know, what year I'll have this, what I would call complete, but I think people will really enjoy switching this plant when it gets to the point where it's actually ready for people to switch. Let's see. Is pretty much the part of the railroad that is, I would say, somewhat operable at the moment. Before I go into talking about the next phase or the lower deck of it, did anybody have any questions about the main level?
About those shelf brackets, the closet made. How long are those, and how long's the shelf there?
Oh, so the brackets are, I think they're 18 inches.
Okay.
The way that I did that, depth of the railroad there is 25 inches. But the way that I did that was I actually screwed the wood down to those brackets. If you've ever seen those shelving brackets, they have holes in them for screws to go in. I took the plywood gussets, I guess I would call it. It's probably not the best term for it. But I took the plywood pieces and I screwed them to it. So they're firmly attached there. It doesn't move at all. Well, you could, but you'd have to really push on it.
Okay. The other question I had was about your backdrop. I think you said it was vinyl. What kind of board is behind it? And then what did you hang it with? Like adhesive, and also, if you get it wet, does it bleed?
Well, I'll kind of work in reverse order. It doesn't bleed. That product is actually PVC. And it's made for outdoor signs. Mike's the printer that it's printed on is probably about 8 feet wide and 10 feet long. It's a huge flatbed. It's printed for outdoor use, so it shouldn't fade and it doesn't run. You can get it wet.
Is it on like a hardboard or something, or is it just freestanding? Or
that particular piece that you see is actually up against the 2x4 framing. Eventually, I don't know if you guys know what a mirror clip is. I don't have anything on that right now.
Okay.
Because I'm kind of given myself some room to adjust it. And it's because of the scenery that's up against it, it's not going anywhere at the moment.
It's pretty rigid.
It is. It
Okay.
is. Although you got an 8-foot long piece of it, because I have it printed in 8 foot by 14-inch wide.
Okay.
It can be, if you hold it up, it'll, it's basically like a big piece of plastic. It'll
Right.
flex.
But rigid enough where it doesn't need a backing. Oh, I mean, you're just up against the frame. That's interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't need it. You can also get a vinyl printout like that comes in a roll, but you do need to put some backdrop behind that. My original layout, just as a side note, had vinyl printing on, it was on tempered hardboard. That's the kind of thing that they wrap vehicles with, but it
Right.
was shinier than
Right.
this. This is flatter. It doesn't reflect as much.
Yeah, it looks really good.
Hey, Larry, this is Alex.
Hi.
I have a couple of questions for you. In regards to your backdrop, you said it has some sort of a backing on it. Is that correct?
It's just printed on a 3mm PVC. Well, this one's 3mm. Usually Mike has told me he can get it from 1mm on up to 4mm.
Uh-huh.
And if you guys have seen the modules that I run with the 4th Division HO Modular Group, that's printed on the same stuff, but it's 4mm thick. And that stuff's pretty rigid.
I noticed that you settled on Digitrax for your control system. What made you to decide on Digitrax rather than, say, something like NCE?
I've used NCE, Digitrax, and the MRC system. One of the things that I noticed right away was that NCE uses a serial port. I do tech support for a living. USB has been around since 1996. That's 26 years. NCE still uses a serial bus for the connection of their systems. Those type of connections are getting harder and harder to find. Also, NCE really wasn't looking to the future. And I could tell when I was looking at systems, I could tell that NCE was kind of stuck on certain things while Digitrax was developing newer stuff. Now they've got a wireless system that is pretty solid. I think way more reliable from what I've seen at shows. Having said that, I will be fair and also say that there's some things about Digitrax that I didn't like. NCE had this Cabo 5 throttle that had a little digital readout of the handy little throttle. I thought that was actually a cool little throttle to have. Also, their Pro Cab has had nicer buttons on it.
Then, a little more than a year ago, Digitrax came out with the UT6D. This small throttle with a color LCD is really great, especially when you're switching. Digitrax has also made the LNWI, which allows you to connect up to 4 Wi-Fi enabled throttles to the LocoNet on your layout with minimal setup.
I've had a lot of fun running on people's layouts that have NCE systems. So I'm not going to sit here and say don't use NCE, because I think that in some ways they have, a nice product.
Larry, hi, it's Jacob. I was wondering about you taking your photos for your photo backdrop, because I was wondering if you have any tips or just general ideas on taking it specifically in an urban setting.
It's actually a much more challenging environment, if you ask me. The two things that I ran into, of course, I'm modeling the 1970s and 1980s, right? And earlier in the presentation, I showed you guys a picture of the depot in Elma, Washington, and that building is long gone. So finding a location that doesn't have something that pops up as completely out of your era is kind of difficult. The other thing that I ran into was standing at street level and trying to take pictures of buildings that were 3 or 4 stories tall. You get a fair amount of parallax, I think is what they call it. That may not be the right term, so I apologize if it's not. Unless you have professional Photoshop, it seems like it's very difficult to fix that. I don't have that. So I use, I meant to mention earlier, I use Photoshop Elements for editing my backdrops, color correcting, changing them to PDFs that are ready to print, and all of that stuff. Those are probably the two things that I ran into that were the most problematic of it. Other than that, a DSLR, when you're taking your photographs and doing it in RAW is probably the other thing that I would recommend people do, unless you have a phone that takes really good pictures and do it really well. Then using a DSLR and using Photoshop to photo merge them into your backdrop, which is also something I've done.
Well, and another thing I'd like to mention briefly is I actually own a drone, so that has a fairly good camera on it. So potentially for, again, taking photos of larger buildings or just other photographs, would a drone potentially work for that purpose?
You know, it might. One thing that I discovered is I also own one. My drone photographs that Photoshop, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to like them very much. When I try to use the photo merge, it really doesn't want to merge those photos. Probably some technique in Photoshop that I'm not aware of. I was thinking along the same exact lines that you were, is that getting up about 40 feet or so and taking pictures of structures would help a lot with that parallax that you get. You know, I might recommend, and I don't think he's on the Zoom call today, but I might recommend that you talk to Byron Osborne with the Boeing Club, because Byron, he and Bill Kedzik build backdrops for their layout. He might have some tips about shooting those buildings. I know that I learned a little bit from him. So props to Byron. To click. There we go. Okay. So this photo was given to me by Scott Golding, who does some historical stuff with the Rainier or Rainier Inc., as it may be now called. I don't know. This was the Rainier paper mill in Hoquiam, Washington. And I had hoped to actually model this mill on my layout, but it will not fit unless I dedicated much more space to the room than I actually wanted to. I would like to point out some features here and part of the reason why it's pretty darn cool. If you look at this photograph, you'll see that to the lower left, line off of the railroad there. And by the way, this photo was taken in the 70s. There's multiple spurs in here for various parts, or the railroad delivered and they shipped various paper products from the plant. Another thing that I found really interesting, if you look to the right in this photo, you'll notice it looks like there's railroad track that goes around the whole facility and out towards the dock part of it, towards Grays Harbor here. And that is actually what they did. So it went all the way, the railroad went all the way around the plant out to the riverside of it, shipped 40 and 50-foot box cars of paper products out. And it's a really cool thing. I figured out that it would probably take me, like, even on my layout, I can't really dedicate that much room to it. But I still think that I'm going to be able to basically cut this in half. This will be a future thing on the lower deck of my railroad. This is a picture that was taken by Joseph Crease, I think is how you spell or how you say his last name. It was in a 2007 Model Railroad Craftsman article on modeling a Puget Sound branch line. And this is the Hoquiam plywood mill that no longer has railroad service. Another thing I wanted to model was a grain train. And in my era, well, there weren't any out there. So I'm going to I'm going to add in a grain transload facility on my lower deck of my layout as well at some point. I'm not sure what that's going to look like yet. I keep debating on whether I will have one that's train to ship, like you would see in Seattle or Tacoma, or if I want to do local farms bringing in soybeans, because there are some soybean farms out in Grays Harbor County, or there have been, and just have those as an outgoing shipment that way. And I like intermodal. So I'm going to have an intermodal facility on the lower deck as well. It's probably going to be truck to train. This is the trash train, which I won't have, but this is a trash train picture that was actually taken south of Elma a few years ago, when I was surprised to see a bunch of containers coming by my mom's house. And I went, wait, what is that? And then I found out that they bring the trash out of Shelton and out of Aberdeen and Hoquiam via train for it to be shipped to Roosevelt.
Hi, this is Todd Von Stopp. I had a question regarding the operations. Are you planning on using switch lists or car cards?
I have debated on both of those things. I'll probably end up with car cards. After doing operations on Bill Messicar's Santa Fe layout, Burr Stewart's Burlington Northern, and Tyler Whitcomb's N-Scale Tenina Western, and others. Didn't like car cards at first because I felt like I was carrying around a deck of cards with me everywhere I went. I found it kind of cumbersome, but I'm actually getting more used to that. So I think I probably am going to do the car card because I am going to have operating sessions at some point. I don't know when that's going to happen, but because I got a lot of layout to build yet.
Hey, Larry, Scott Stoll here. Just a question on your painting of your and weathering of your ties and your tracks. What was your technique that you used for that?
I use an airbrush. I have a Posh airbrush, but really I think a Badger or a Wada, whatever you feel comfortable using, just as well, whatever look you're going for. I played around with several colors, and I've sort of settled on a combination of Vallejo mahogany and flat brown for my rail weathering. And I just go along and I try to do this before I ballast anything, but I've done a little bit of it after that. It's kind of a pain, but I've done it, where I go along with my airbrush and just go to town, paint it.
Is that a Central Valley double track bridge in your current scene?
Oh, that's a Walters bridge. Both those pieces are Walters. That's their double track arched Pratt Bridge, I think is what they called it.
Todd again. I recently visited Tyler Whitcomb's layout as well, or asking him about his water technique. Now that you've tried that, it looks like it came out pretty well. Was it hard to do, or is there any like tips to that?
It is. It's more nerve-wracking, I think, the first time you do it versus looking at the color. You think, wow, I'm really going to have to be very picky about, how much color I put in and all that. I've been doing my own video series, much the same as Burr has done on some of his stuff on my YouTube channel. The product, you have to mix it for 10 minutes. So you're sitting there mixing. I highly recommend making yourself maybe a little diorama, something that's like a foot long or so, and then painting the bottom the color that you think you're going to paint it. Put the materials in the bottom, the things you think you want to put on the bottom of your body of water, whether it's a river or bay or whatever it is, and then mixing up some of the product, pouring it in there. It takes 24 to 48 hours to cure, depending on how thick you make it. Look at it and see if it matches what you want, because you can take that diorama, of course, and toss it once you're done with it. But the diorama that I made to test my theories worked out really well. One thing that I'll point out that isn't obvious, the Magic Water has a tendency to creep. I used an acrylic matte medium and I painted the edges where I wanted the product to stop. If I didn't do that, that water would have crept clear up on the bank and the entire thing would look wet. Acrylic matte varnish will keep it from climbing walls, so to speak.
Thanks, Larry. That was excellent. If you haven't looked at his YouTube channel, he's really described a lot of this in great detail in this whole series of layout updates, which are all publicly accessible.